Delighted to see you all. My name is Trevor Watkins. I'm the Global Head of Sport and Entertainment at Pinsent Masons, global professional services firm. Probably better known for having taken over AFC Bournemouth and run it for 5 years from 1997 onwards. Very proud that we're still playing in the same stadium. Not so proud that one of our guests on the panel today won last night, so it makes us look unlikely to qualify for European competition. We'll come back to that. But more importantly, what a great panel we have for you today. Peter Ridsdale, who was just saying to me, Peter, 1987 you got involved in football. 1997 you became chairman of Leeds, and a terrific career. Barnsley, Plymouth Argyle, currently Preston North End.
Yeah, I mean, Plymouth, I was just working for the administrator, and Barnsley, the same. I bought out of administration. So most of my career was 16 years at Leeds United, 5 years as chairman of Cardiff City when we went to the playoff final and the FA Cup final, and the last 14 years at Preston North End.
And we have Paul Barber, Chief Executive, Brighton Hove Albion. Paul, you've been there best part 14, 15 years?
14 years, yeah.
And terrific victory last night over Liverpool, come from behind. And
thank you. Yeah,
it was delighted. Fantastic. You've made the effort to come here, share your insight. But a career where you've been involved with many businesses, but also Spurs, Vancouver Whitecaps, and Brighton and Hove Albion. So a wealth of experience and insight.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was an early start this morning, so I'm glad we won last night. Might not have been in as good a mood 4 o'clock in the morning if we hadn't have done so. No, delighted to be here. Thanks, Trevor.
Mark Miles, Managing Director, West Bromwich Albion. Sadly, not a winning end to the season, but under US ownership. And you've been involved, well, how many years at West Brom?
22 years now. I've been at West Brom, came through as sort of facilities manager and worked my way through to 1 or 2 board directors and managing director as it is now.
And last but not least, Sarah Guilfoyle, Wigan Athletic. Very different path for you. How many years have you been involved in football now?
So I've been in football for 12 years. I started working in football really young, sort of as soon as I left school. I've been at Wigan for 8.5, so I joined in a very junior role as academy secretary. And I've been very fortunate to have my career through Wigan Athletics, so working my way up to managing director in January this year.
And you've had a new owner for the last couple of years?
Yeah, so we've had quite a few ownership groups in the last 5 years. So July 2020 we went to administration, had a year in administration. We were taken out by administration by Bahrainian ownership, and then 2 years ago, unfortunately, we ended up in quite heavy financial distress again. So Mike Danson, who's local to Wigan, London-based businessman, he took the club over in June 2023.
So for you, we'll start with ask you first. Leadership. You're managing director of Wigan Athletic, middle of League One. What does leadership mean for you of your club and your role?
For me, we're in a bit of a transitional period. So as I've just mentioned, we've been in financial distress twice in 5 years. So one thing I've sort of said to the staff that work for me now is we're not a cat. We don't have 9 lives. We've had 2. So for me, one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years is that transparency and good communication is really important, both with supporters as to where we are as a football club, because when they've nearly lost that football club twice, there hasn't always been an awful lot of communication of information, and that leads to rumours and whispers, and it's not really healthy for our fan base to be sort of speculating, but speculating in quite a bad way. So yeah, communication, but also for the staff as well. So myself included, there's a lot of staff that have been through that 5-year period that it's been very unsettling at times. So for them, they need to know the security, and I do that through regularly communicating with them, both good and bad. I try to take quite an honest approach to my leadership, so I will give the staff as much information as I possibly can, obviously without going into the realms of confidentiality, because I think it's really important that they know what's going on, and it stops those rumours and whispers, which is what makes people spiral. So for me, it's important to be as transparent as I can without giving too much away.
Peter, that's an interesting point from Sarah. You were mentioning to me that, all of your experience, it's not just obviously about the staff. Stakeholder management and relationship as a leader in football. How have you found that?
I think the real challenge, to be honest, is you've got disparate groups who've got different demands and needs. So you've got an owner who obviously wants to make sure you're running it within the financial means that they're setting the targets for. You've got a football manager who is testing you all the time on how much money you've got to invest so they can get the best chance on the field. And you've got a fan base who in the main aren't interested in anything other than spend more than you've got. And to try and balance those three constituencies has got harder and harder and harder over the last few years, particularly as there's been so much external investment from overseas into English football that the ability to compete on what people euphemistically call a level playing field has disappeared. Whether it be, just look at Birmingham City at the moment, how much their ownership group's putting in. Just look at the parachute payment clubs who keep yo-yoing between the Premier League and the Championship, and supporters aren't interested in that. All they want you to do is to go out and spend and compete. They don't want you to put the season ticket prices up. They don't want to put any more of their own money in, but they demand success. And we've been now, this is the 11th year consecutively we're going to be in the Championship. That's the longest continuous run in the Championship we've had since 1961. And they think it's a disaster. They think we're failing. They want change. They want the ownership group out. We don't have any debt whatsoever. They're not interested. It's all about success on the field. So balancing those three constituents is getting harder by the day, to be honest. I don't see where it's going. And once you put a football regulator in, who's talking about this word sustainability, which I don't know what it means, at that point you've got another constituent who's saying you've got to prove you've got enough cash. And I think that we're going to be in for a real roller coaster ride over the next few years.
I think that's a good point. I think we're going to leave the regulator to the last bit because I think that's probably the most entertaining. So we'll make sure we keep everybody here. What would you think, just Peter, if you were a Wrexham fan? Is there going to come a tipping point of expectation not being matched when Ryan Reynolds perhaps gets fed up with what's going on, or is it a great model?
Well, look, the reality is, if you're a Wrexham fan at the moment, it's as good as it gets. And you can't knock what's happened. The glitz and the glamour of the US and film stars getting involved is great. But you've got some clubs who've had ownership over a period of time and you've had sustainability or competitiveness, or they've survived. I think the real challenge for Wrexham is when they first hiccup, or when the current owners decide they don't want to put that amount of money in on a consistent basis. You've got some clubs, let's take Manchester City. Look at their ownership model, it's unbelievable, but their overhead structure is such that if the current ownership disappeared, who's got the wealth to take that on, and then what happens to them? Wrexham, in a not dissimilar way, they're spending more on wages in the upcoming season, if rumours are true, than we've spent on any single season since we've been in the Championship. It's their first season up. They've got the money, hopefully. But if that doesn't then translate into promotion to the Premier League, how long can they sustain that? I don't know. They've done a great job in bringing in sponsorship from their friends and people they know. So it's a great model, but I think it's early days, and I don't know how it'll end.
So in contrast, Paul, can I say, from your perspective, England, then Canada, and you've been at Brighton, and you've seen that club build up, huge success. How difficult has it been, and how has your leadership evolved with the different challenges you faced?
Well, this month in 1997, Brighton were on the verge of not just going out of Football League, but going out of business. No stadium, no training ground, fan base down to 4,000 or 5,000. The club was in a dire financial position. The leadership really came from Tony Bloom coming in, obviously putting money into the club, establishing a very clear vision for us, and then putting his money where his mouth is in terms of building the stadium. And the stadium has been the bedrock of what we've been able to achieve. And let's be clear, we've had a very good period in the last sort of decade or so, but we still haven't won a major trophy. So success is relative, and it's very difficult to put silverware on the cabinet if you're a club of Brighton's size. Fantastic to see Crystal Palace achieve what they did at the weekend for football, not just for their club, but for football as a whole. But it's difficult. And, in terms of leadership, the clear vision is really important. Clear communication, as Sarah said, is vital. Being transparent with the fans, because Peter's right, no matter how well you do, relatively speaking, the fans always demand more, expect more. The more successful you are, the more harder it becomes because expectations rise. And this business is all about performance on the pitch and results. You know, we can have the best sponsors, we can have a great stadium, fantastic training ground, but if you're not winning on the pitch, the fans won't be happy. So, and I saw that in Vancouver, in Major League Soccer, where it's different, but the same in many ways. And it's no different in the Championship or the Premier League. And ultimately, actually, it's no different with the national team. Because if England aren't winning World Cups or getting to finals, then the manager's terrible, the FA should be sacked, and everyone, you know, thinks English football's a mess. So, you know, we're in a competitive sport, and results matter.
Pick up, just before we turn to Mark, Peter's point. What is sustainability then in football, in your mind?
Well, I think it depends which part of the stakeholder map you're on. You know, if you're the government, it's about making sure that we behave ourselves, the fans behave themselves, that we've got enough money in the bank, that we don't overstretch, fine. But that doesn't meet the fans' expectations, which is success on the pitch, which comes at a cost to owners. And ultimately, you're in this constant circle of chasing your tail to some extent. And we're all looking for that extra edge. In our case, it's recruitment. You know, we spend a lot of time and focus on how we recruit players, but then we've got to be prepared to sell them at the right time, because that's how our model works. So if you sell them at the right time, it's usually when they're doing well and you're doing well. That sets the coach back a season or two, because you've just sold your best players, usually to Chelsea in our case. But yeah, it's difficult. It depends where on the stakeholder map you are as to what success looks like and to what sustainability looks like from that position.
And for you, Mark, West Bromwich Albion, you've had ownership from China, you've now got ownership from America. If we start looking, though, at, first of all, at your relationship, we've talked a lot about off the field. How far do you get involved on the field? I'm not asking if you pick the team, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of two directors of West Bromwich Albion, so ultimately I'm the only UK-based director that's there, so the buck does stop with me from that side. So there's an oversight of everything that goes with it, but to me, leadership is about being that go-to person, and I think when I took over the full MD role a couple of years ago, we were, as Paul mentioned, sort of 25 years ago, they had financial difficulties. We did as well. We had an ownership group that was coming to end towards the end of its tenure and was unable to put any more money into the club. So it was then having to be very situational to make sure that we could keep the club functioning. As Peter says, the different stakeholders, you've got an owner who wanted to look to sell the club, you've got fans that wanted success on the pitch, and you had your staff that are looking to you for that kind of comfort that they were going to get paid at the end of the month. So I think it's there, and I think it's been able to manage those different parties differently is key within it all.
And have you seen a marked difference between ownership under the previous owner and ownership now under an American group?
Enormous. Our previous owner very much left us alone, didn't interfere in anything that goes with it. We now have a very hands-on American ownership group, which is great because it's bringing different challenges, different ideas. They're challenging us to do better, which is key in any walk of life to do it. And when we talk about, you mentioned the Wrexham and their neighbours with Birmingham City, who have got some very sort of active ownership groups. It's kind of how can we do the same and actually do better? But it's then being able to retain the culture within what West Bromwich Albion means, and we've had a great history of equality, diversity, inclusion. He's been able to keep that at the core, and it was great when Shillan and the Bilk came in. They were keen to understand what the football club meant, what it meant to the community, what it meant to the supporters, and being able to keep on that and build on it going further forwards.
And have you found a sort of evolution in how far you would or wouldn't get involved in relation to players and management on that side?
Definitely so, and I think one of the key things of leadership is being able to be flexible, and it's being able to change your management style to what's needed. I'd say managing up for me has been very different with this current ownership group than it was before, and it's been able to flex and make sure we get what's best for the football club and the business.
And Sarah, for you at Wigan, you mentioned earlier that you've undergone a series of transformations, which I think we see a lot of clubs. How have you adapted and have you found your leadership has changed? I mean, because you've seen the club under different ownership where it's failed financially. Now you're back with a local owner. Is there a difference in emphasis for you?
So just to add a bit of context to that, so the best period of history in Wigan Athletics' time was obviously we spent 8 years in the Premier League. We won the FA Cup in 2013. And that was all done under local ownership. So a gentleman called Dave Whelan, local man, self-made, and chose to invest in the local football club and sort of do every football club owner's dream, which is take them to the Premier League. He sold the club. We went through a Hong Kong-based consortium which bought the club, and they ran it well for a couple of years. But then they started to get bored and basically just one day turned the taps off and put us into administration. As I mentioned before, we got out of administration. We were bought by a group from Bahrain, and initially they were really invested. And again, after 2 years, they didn't quite turn the taps off, but the taps ran out basically. And what they'd wanted to invest over 5 years, they invested in 18 months, and it accumulated. The last season we were in the Championship, we obviously got relegated and we lost £17.5 million, which is from a business that they took from scratch. There was no debt, no contracts. They could have chosen to run a football club a very different way, and they didn't. So for us, being back under local ownership is sort of a security blanket for us. The two foreign ownerships we've had, it's worked for a short period of time, and then they've got bored. They've no links to the area, and it was quite easy for them to up and leave. Our current owner, Mike, he's from Wigan. He's based in London now because that's where his business is. He owns us, he owns the stadium, and he also owns our sister club, which is Wigan Warriors Rugby Club. For those that follow rugby league, they're sort of like the Man United of rugby league, and he's really invested in the area of Wigan, which is really important to me. It adds security to us, to my staff. But sort of as I mentioned before, obviously having been through all of that, it makes me want to communicate a lot more, make sure everyone knows what's going on, but shout about successes. This year for us on the field hasn't been what we wanted it to be. Historically, we've been quite successful in League One, and we finished mid-table this year. It's not necessarily what our staff and our fans expect, but we're also doing some really, really good things with the academy, with the community. We set up a women's team who have done fantastically well this year. There's a lot of good things we're doing at the club, and it's making sure we're shouting about those, that there's still a lot of good things going on at our football club, and we will get the on-field stuff right, but it takes time to undo what a couple of ownerships groups worth of bad decisions have done.
Trevor, can I just say something there, though?
Please, Peter, go on.
You know, we can sit here and say, we do this inside the club and it's great, we do this inside the club, we do this in the community. The biggest single challenge is we've got more and more supporters in English football who are demanding success, whatever that means. We've got owners who have only got pockets that are so deep. Wigan have already said they've had 2 that have hiccuped. And we've got an owner who's putting £13 million a year in, and social media every single day of the week is saying, get out the club, we need new owners. Now, the problem is, unless anybody in this room wants to see me afterwards and they've got a big checkbook, there's no queue of people who are sitting there saying, we want to put more than £13 million a year in to give you half a chance of succeeding against parachute clubs, etc. And that tension on the staff within the club who are having to deal with a fan base and social media, not just at Preston, but a lot of clubs who are demanding success and think they've got a right to success, an ownership group, wherever they're from in the world, and ours happen to be local businessmen, who are putting in not an insignificant amount of money. I mean, £13 million a year, and that is deemed unacceptable, and they're getting abuse. So there's no other industry other than football where when you wake up in the morning, how well you're doing is printed in the newspaper. It's called a league table. And there's only one going to be top, and 3 are going to go down every year, subject to which league you're in. And that tension, challenge, and the dynamics between the two parties, forget internally. I've been this for 38 years. I've never, ever seen it as bad as it is today, and I don't know where it's going to stop.
And I think they say, well, come back to what the solutions might be. Interestingly, as a quick plug, 3 o'clock, we are talking about profit against ambition. It's actually probably profit's a bit of anathema to most clubs. It's 3 o'clock in here with 3 other interesting panellists. But just to go back and look at Wigan for a second. Local owner, 2 failed ownerships before. As a leader, is it better to have an owner that can arguably take you to a particular place in the league, or to have an owner that might say, hey, I can get you to the Premier League, potentially? Or is it not mutually exclusive?
I think it's become a thing that when people take over football clubs, that's their vision, that we want to take the club to the Premier League. I mean, I'm going to sit here and say I'd absolutely love to take Wigan Athletic back to the Premier League, but I think your ambitions have also got to be realistic. Our owner has said in an ideal world that would be wonderful, but what I don't want to do as a leader is risk the future of the football club doing that. So you can do it sensibly. Brighton are a great example of that. Luton are, Brentford. If you're clever, you do need resource, but you don't have to buy your way there. You can. There's an element of being successful just by making sure you're making the right decisions. Our vision for us at the moment is getting back to the Championship, and then once we're there, reevaluating how we're able to do that.
Paul, I mean, relatively stable, if there is such a thing, in the Premier League. We've seen the 3 clubs that went up go back down again this season. What does that do for you as a leader if you're at one of those clubs? I mean, it must be immensely difficult.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we haven't been in that situation. We've had 8 good seasons in the Premier League. Next year will be the 9th, and we've been able to make progress in most of those seasons. But we've also had to sell very good players in order to retain our sustainability. Last year we were the most profitable football club in the world, which was incredible, but that was on the back of selling our best players. So the key there was actually being able to replace them and to try and make sure that we could maintain our momentum in the Premier League. The clubs that go down, it's very, very difficult. We obviously sit around the table as colleagues for 12 months, and you can see what's happening to 2 or 3 clubs that are sliding further and further away from the rest. And it's really difficult because they've got that horrible choice. Do they invest again in January and risk putting their clubs into a less financially sustainable position if they do go down? Or do they sit tight and hope that the group they've got delivers and then risk being further adrift from the rest? So, it's very difficult to compete in the Premier League these days. I think, as Peter said, it's harder than ever. This is my 28th season in football, and I think it's harder than ever for clubs not only to get out of the Championship, but once they're out, stay there, because they've got that very difficult decision to make: invest, not invest, stick or twist, try and compete and stay there, or take that horrible decision that I think probably Luton did, which was not spend as much as others and then risk relegation and then a double relegation. It's very, very difficult. I'm very fortunate. I've never been in a position where I've been relegated, but I've been close with Brighton in the first 2 seasons in the Premier League. It's a very, very uncomfortable feeling.
And as Peter was saying, it's interesting. I mean, from my perspective, my day job at St Mason's, I cannot believe how many groups are still coming forward wanting to buy teams. And just last week, we had 3 groups, credible groups, all wanting to spend a 9-figure sum. I think, Trevor, everyone thinks...
Have you got my business card?
Everyone thinks that they can do better. And everyone's got that dream. Everyone thinks they've got that special sauce that is what it takes to make a club more successful than the people that own it already. And I think very often owners get in and they realise it's not quite as easy as it looks on the outside, or they think it's going to be. And it takes a lot more money, and it takes patience, and it takes calm heads in difficult moments to make the right decisions. And, sport, as I said earlier, is about winning. So therefore, you've got these added pressures of fans, media, expectations of managers, players that are ambitious and want to play at the highest level they can as quickly as they can, earn as much money as they can. So you've got so many different competing interests. And for new owners, I think that can come as a bit of a shock.
Mark, I was going to ask, because West Brom have been up, they've been down, up and down, and hopefully back up again next season. How challenging have you found that? And as Paul was saying, new owners coming in, you're under new ownership. How has it been?
Yeah, I mean, our new ownership is brilliant from where we were. But I think one of the key things, as we say, in the absence of parachute payments for most clubs in the Championship, what we have to do is be different. We have to be innovative and look at how can we compete differently on the field. And I think that's where we as leaders of football clubs come into it, because ownership groups do change. from there. But it's actually being able to maintain that levelness and work out how do we do things, how do we protect the staff, how do we protect the community, because our football clubs are assets within the community that goes with it. And I think we're very lucky with our current ownership group at the moment that they get us, they understand what's important and what's not. And I don't think it's important where the ownership group comes from. I think the important part is the owner themselves, or that group, and what their morals, what their values are. And we're very lucky in that position at the moment to have a great ownership group that wants to invest in the club. When people say to me, what are they like? It's very much like it's evolution. So rather than going down the revolution route, which certain clubs have, we go down this softly approach. And look, as we say, it's every ownership and every football club's aspiration is to get into the Premier League that goes with it. In reality, unless anything changes, you probably come back down again fairly quickly, because that's the model that seems to be happening at the moment. But once you get in there, you can keep being innovative, inventive, using data, using different social platforms, different ways to generate money, because there is only so much money ownership groups can put in. And so we're looking at how do you get that sponsorship, that partnership, and utilise the vehicle that is football at the moment, and the momentum it has is to generate that extra ability so you can invest into the team, into the stadium, into the whole infrastructure.
And for you in the Championship in English football, you have a formula that allows you to lose a certain amount of money over a period to help regulate what you can or cannot do. But for Sarah, for you, rules are changing a little bit this coming season. So for League One and League Two, Football League are looking at if money comes in, it has to be spent in certain ways.
Yeah, so in the Championship you can lose £39 million over 3 seasons, so it's sort of
It's
like
very generous, isn't it?
it's an investment model, as in if you success isn't instant, so if you do want to invest in stuff, it allows you that opportunity. So at League One and League Two level at the moment, we've got something called SCMP, the Salary Cost Protocol Management Protocol, sorry. And in that, League Two, you can spend 50% of your turnover. In League One, you can spend 60%. Now, in this current season, and what has historically happened, is you can invest unlimited amounts of equity. They've changed the rules this time that you have to actually physically put the money in as well. What used to happen is you could put the money in on a promise, and what happened to us was the money was put in on a promise and then the money never turned up. But clubs in League One and League Two have voted to change that a little bit. So rather than the equity you can put in being unlimited, the equity you put in, don't quote me on the exact figures because I can't recall them to memory. It's sort of like there's a tax on it. So you could put so much money in and 100% of it can go to player wages. Thereafter, after a certain amount, on a decreasing scale, a certain percentage of it goes to player wages and the other side has to go into infrastructure. So in League One and League Two, it is making sure that where there's not large volumes of money, with the exception obviously Birmingham and Wrexham and a couple of others in League One that have already been mentioned, making sure they're still focusing on the other stuff, and you've not got an unlimited license to lose as much money as humanly possible.
Which all sounds fairly reasonable, Peter, but clearly this may well be a response to what government is intending to do, but government clearly doesn't think that football can lead itself. So it's putting an independent regulator in. That independent regulator has been identified. We know it's going to become law. The real battle, I think, over the next 6 months is exactly what the rules will say. Good or bad idea, Peter?
I think the danger with any regulator is that they just add to the burden that's already there on football clubs in terms of reporting the financial numbers. I don't think they will truly understand the ramifications of their demands on forward funding. I think, therefore, there's a real risk that in an industry that hasn't seen any businesses go out of business for years and years and years, there's been a number of football clubs going to administration, as we've already heard, but they've then been bought again and they're still trading within the pyramid system. I think if any regulator comes in and thinks that owners are going to suddenly stick forward funding for 2 or 3 years into a sealed bank account, they're kidding themselves.
And that's a real concept, is it?
The answer is I don't know yet, because none of us know, but what we've heard from some of the regulators is they use the word sustainability more often than any other word. And I don't know what that means, because you could argue sustainability is already there because clubs haven't gone out of business. I think the danger is some of these people think sustainability is putting the money in advance for a number of years And there are many owners, including ours, who will just say that's not the way their cash flow works. They haven't got those sorts of numbers. There's no other industry where you've got the tensions between people who are being asked to put in substantial amounts of money just to survive, then a regulator who might demand it up front, and then a fan base who are demanding us put even more in. So, I used to work in retail. If our customers didn't like us, they went somewhere else. In football, if your customers, and please, I'm not calling supporters customers because I'll get somebody throwing something at me.
It's going to be straight on the internet.
Yeah,
Peter.
but if supporters don't like what you're doing, they don't go somewhere else. They just tell you they don't like what you're doing. And then they demand you do something even better, which is put more money in. So I think the tensions that currently exist, which are the worst I've known since I've been in football, are going to get even greater the minute the regulator comes in.
Tensions between who?
Tensions between regulation and the demands on financial sustainability and the supporter base who demand even greater investment. Because if you dumb it down in inverted commas into a model that's totally sustainable, the Premier League will go off into the sunset, if they already haven't, from the rest of the English football pyramid. And I think that's a detriment to English football personally. Paul?
And one of the problems, Trevor, is that, and we've had many conversations with the government about this, is that they don't quite understand that in football, for someone to win, it means someone else has to lose. And when football clubs lose, that tends to be when they drop down the league, their gates drop, sponsors fall away, and financial sustainability becomes harder. So what do you then do to have to reverse that? You have to spend more. So the whole concept of financial sustainability, as Peter quite rightly alludes to, is very difficult, and it's not quite as simple as the government see it. The other problem is a lot of the clubs that require a lot of extra help, the smaller clubs who do have lower revenues, also have lower staffing numbers. So any kind of increased regulation that requires licensing, more paperwork, more audits, is going to be harder for those clubs, but they're the ones arguably that most need it. So we're in danger of burdening the industry with a lot of extra cost, a lot of extra work, at a time when actually what we want our staff to be doing is focus on revenue raising, not adding costs to our businesses. So I think the government have got to tread very carefully, because if this goes wrong, it's on them. And not many politicians like that burden. So let's see where this goes, and let's see how it goes, and let's try and make sure, if we can, between us, that we keep the regulation as light touch as possible. Because effectively, the football industry has sustained itself very, very well for 150 odd years. We've made a few missteps in the last decade or so, and we're paying for those, and probably in some cases rightly. And there are some parts of the regulation that we can live with. Better fan engagement, no problem. Asking clubs to be more fiscally responsible, no problem. But trying to marry all of the competing interests, being successful on the pitch with being financially sustainable off it, is going to be tough.
Mark, I mean, if one believes what one reads, we could have every senior executive having to be approved by the regulator. We could have, as Peter's mentioned, owners having to put money up front for a number of years. Is there an ill that needs to be corrected, remedied by a regulator, or do you think football really doesn't need that as a leader in the business?
I think a lot of it comes down to the proof in the pudding. I think, as Peter and Paul have said, football has sustained itself. Very, very few clubs go out of business that goes with it compared to the rest of business. Is there a need for a regulator? I don't think there's a problem in principle with it, but again, the devil being the detail that goes with it. It seems to me that, again, as Paul said, things like fan engagement, we're all doing that already, and it's just going to sort of reinforce what we're doing. The whole stringent tests on reporting is going to be a challenge, and whereas Premier League can almost have as many staff as they need because of the revenues, as you come down the pyramid, it's far, far, far more difficult. You have 1, 2, 3 staff in each department. Our accounts departments, for example, at the moment, we as a football club, we have to report to the league, we have to report to the independent board within the league. We may have to do the regulator again, and that's sustained upon 3 or 4 different people doing that. So that is a challenge. It seems to me that obviously a lot of the impetus of the regulator of late has been because of the inability between the league, the EFL and the Premier League to come up with a suitable model for redistribution. That seems to have added the extra impotence and has expedited happening a little bit more at the moment. But a regulator, is it a problem? Not in principle, but it depends on how it's managed. And I think, to me, you have to have people, you have to know football to manage football. It's not like retail or anything else. You have to understand the idiosyncrasies that happen within football in order to regulate it. And that's my concern, is that you have people from government or quangos who don't quite understand how football operates. And within that, I think that's where there's going to be tensions potentially develop over the years.
And you would have thought with the FA, Premier League, EFL, there's probably enough regulation. But for you, Sarah, at Wigan, as Paul's just mentioned, the amount of bureaucracy, I mean, it's a fact. We've got 8 to 10 people in my business who are focusing on this area to support clubs. We're not doing it for the goodness of our heart. It's part of business. So it's costing clubs. How are you going to cope?
To be honest, we're in a bit of a transition period from that operations point of view anyway. So my previous role to managing director was head of football administration, which is sort of the club secretary type role. And it's sort of like an ongoing thing with the league that year on year, more and more stuff keeps getting put on that role. And they've actually had to create a course for training people up how to be club secretaries, because there's that much burden put on them that people are starting to make mistakes. The irony of that was that they sat in a room with us at a conference and said, right, you guys, you all need to go on this course. We need to teach you how to be club secretaries. And that didn't go down well with some people that have been a club secretary for 20 odd years. But then and saying we don't have enough time. And then the next breath went, actually, would any of you like to tutor on the course as well? It's like, hang on, I thought we needed to go on this course. So I can see a lot of that being put on them, and also the finance department as well. But sort of as we've just mentioned, whether you're under financial fair play, SCMP, whatever the model is in the division that you're in, there's a lot on the finance department as well in terms of reporting already. So it would be ideal if the regulation across from the FA, from UEFA, from the EFL, the Premier League, and the regulator was in the same format, because potentially you've got your finance department and your club secretary having to regurgitate the same information 4 or 5 times for 4 or 5 different peoples in different formats.
Peter, I mean, it's not as if football, I mean, if you take even financial regulation, where we've represented Everton, we represent Manchester City, it's interesting seeing that regulations just get unpicked and challenged, and they then evolve again. How successful do you think a regulator could be? I mean, you know the individual that's been appointed, or is it going to wither and die?
Well, if it withers and dies, it's almost great news. The problem is it doesn't wither and die and actually becomes a problem. I mean, let's face facts. We've got UEFA saying you've got financial fair play. We've got the Premier League with financial fair play. We've got the EFL with financial fair play. And for those who stick to it, it's burdensome. If we're all honest, which people don't like me saying what I'm about to say, there's plenty who find loopholes. You know, associated party transactions are interesting concepts. You know, at what point are they really associated parties? At what point are the market rate?
So I was going to say, so just for the benefit of the audience, this is where you have an ownership group and they do a deal for sponsorship or something with a company that's they know.
Yes, look, the reality is that you've got plenty of clubs, which I don't have to mention here, who ownership group happen to be related to the parties on the front of the shirts or the stadium naming rights. I have no issue with that, personally. But if you're turning a blind eye to whether that's market rate, and then we recently had to prove, we played Aston Villa in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, and we got an extra 100,000 from advertising boards for that game. We had to show the contract for the extra 100,000 to prove for our profits and sustainability that it was real income. Well, we're just being on worldwide TV on a quarterfinal of the Cup, and it's 100 grand. You've got clubs out there with multi-million sponsorship deals who may or may not be closely linked to the football club that people turn a blind eye to. So my concern, frankly, is we've got loads of regulation already. It ain't working as it is. We're going to add even more regulation. And I'm really concerned that what it actually does inherently is damage the industry. Because let's look at the Premier League. I was around when it was formed. I was at Leeds United when it was formed. it's one of the most successful products in any sporting industry that any country has delivered on a worldwide basis in recent history. If by what we're doing we undermine that, I think it's a problem for English football. I do think distribution between the Premier League, which has been so successful, and the multiple that clubs in the Premier League get versus the rest of the pyramid needs readdressing in a way that doesn't damage either. And football has demonstrated it can't do that. And I think that's partly why the regulator's there. But if you start getting into trying to regulate clubs like Wigan, like Oaths, West Brom, clubs in League Two, it may well be the tipping point to put them out of business, and I think that's dangerous.
So, Paul, before we just come to a general summary, we've just seen Chelsea with accounts, a price of value put on the women's team, and then a few weeks later, we've seen 8, 9, 10% of it sold, and a lot of questions in the press about that valuation. Given everybody has a view, everybody has an understanding, and things, as Peter said, can be bent and twisted or whatever, where do you think it ends up? Is a regulator going to make any difference, or is football best left to itself?
Well, time will tell, but as we've already said, we're probably the most regulated industry already. It's not just FIFA, UEFA, Premier League, EFL, FA. There's local authority, Sports Ground Safety Authority, fire services. We've got huge amounts of regulation around us already. And my concern is the cost burden, whether it takes us any further forward. As we said earlier, there are some elements of it that make sense and are valid. But again, the majority of clubs, certainly in the top 2 divisions of the league, and I think the 3rd division as well, are already engaging well with their fans. They're already protecting their heritage. They already are not going to change their blue colours to red or their yellow and green colours to purple. I mean, we're not idiots. We know what our value is and we know what our brand heritage is. And our fans are pretty good regulators. You saw what happened with the European Super League. Mm-hmm. The clubs that led that got a pretty big backlash very quickly, not from government, from their fans. So, do we need it? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. But we are where we are. We've got to work with it, live with it. And as Peter says, let's see what happens. If it disappears, it's because it wasn't needed. My concern is that the mission of the regulator creeps even further and we have even more administrative burden and even more cost. That's not going to help industry. It's also going to be a barrier to entry for new owners. And clubs that very often get into trouble need new owners. So if they're put off by more regulation, that's not good for football.
And that's a good point, actually. The most inquiries we've had and the most questions we've been asked have come from potential owners or people who are in the game saying, how is this going to impact on the value of my investment, on my funding arrangements, on the way in which I do business? But let's end on a positive note. We've nearly completed a season in the Premier League. Football League is completed. Sarah, looking forward next year and beyond, what are you seeing as the things that are going to inspire you most as leader of Wigan Athletic?
Well, one of the decisions we took quite early on, so myself and another lady called Brenda Spencer, we joined the board in January in our new positions, and one of the things we did quite quickly was realise on the field it wasn't working with the manager, so we made that decision to change the manager quite quickly. I'm really excited about that giving our head coach now, Ryan, the summer to do what he needs to do with the squad. He already managed to get a lot more out of the players that we already had in the building. Off the field, doing some really, really exciting stuff with schools. One of my really important projects is engaging the next generation of young Wigan Athletic fans, so hopefully launching something we've never done before and quite large next season. So sort of 2 exciting things on either side, on and off the field. And
Mark, West Bromwich Albion. Unfortunately, I haven't got enough time to talk about changing of managers. That was obviously challenging for you the last season. But looking ahead, new fresh start, what are your inspirations for next season?
Yeah, so we're obviously in the process of bringing a new head coach over the next couple of weeks. But we've got a really exciting season ahead for us. People saw Goodison was the last time the men's team played there at the weekend. We celebrate 125 years this season based at the Hawthorns. We've got 150 years of the club in existence in a couple of years' time. I think it's probably Preston are the club that have been at the ground the longest, I think. So we've got a season of celebrations that goes with it. Our season didn't end as we wanted, not making the playoffs, but as we celebrate 125 years, we're looking to bring on a fan advisory board, and we will be pushing for those playoffs to hopefully get back to the Premier League, which was, when we were last there, it was in COVID. So we had 18 of our 19 home games were there with no fans there whatsoever. And our last game of the season, we literally had 2,000. So hopefully that's where we're looking to go next season.
And Paul, for Brighton, obviously one more game to go. Great journey that you've been on. What next?
Well, first of all, I hope, speaking as a Spurs fan, that Spurs win on Wednesday and have the biggest party North London's ever seen, because we're there on Sunday, and I'm hoping that they're still having that party. And if we win that game, it gives us a chance of qualifying for the Conference League next year, which would be amazing. But yeah, next year is our 125th anniversary as a club, and I think for our fans, being in existence, you know, is a wonderful thing. Being in the Premier League is incredible, and trying to maintain the journey that we've been on will be their number one priority, and it'll be mine as well.
And Peter, last word to you. Almost 40 years in the game. What's your hopes for it going forward?
I think the game is, for all we've critiqued it today, I think English football is fantastic. I think the Premier League is wonderful as a flagship. And I think if we can get some redistribution at a sensible level, the pyramid will end up stronger. And I'm very proud and privileged to have been involved in the game. And for as long as somebody continues to pay me, I'll continue to do so.
Which is a tremendous note to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. A big round of applause for our panellists.